Oh, there, Nick's on video now.
Finally figured it out.
That's okay. It will definitely be a heck of a lot easier when we can just walk into the council chambers and have everything there and recorded, and it's just a lot easier. Hopefully by summer, that's the hope.
I still have my same AOL account from when it first started, how many years ago, and people make fun of me.
Oh, that's hilarious. So where do you live in Kent?
Jesse?
Oh, Jesse, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, one of our engineers lives on Jesse upstairs, Corey Finney. She moved there maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 now. Time flies anymore.
Yeah.
I like that street.
We got our first day that we moved in, we had 3 deer in the backyard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that, I think that was a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Bridget, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Hi, Nick.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Good.
Tim, I saw that you called me. I believe I was on another line maybe last week. I'm thinking you were maybe calling me about the park fee, but then spoke to Jen.
Yes, yeah, I talked to her already.
Okay.
I called you today. Did Hasawi name his apartment building? Or is it just Hasawi building?
It's just going to be called Hasawi's. I mean, he's not referred to the building as anything but that. So I think it's, you know, Hasawi's is the name of the building, and that'll cover the restaurant. And he hasn't come to us with a sign package yet. So maybe he will carve out a name, but I don't know. I always got the impression it was just going to be like the residents at Hasawi's. Like he was just going to say that those are the upstairs units.
Gotcha.
Now your buildings had 3 different names. My favorite was, yeah, it was the Onyx, and then the West End Apartments, and now it's West Kent Apartments.
Yeah.
Our favorite was the Onyx, just so you know. But that was only when before the Arc Board nixed the dark brick, which we knew they were. But when Randy showed up with Adam Branscombe to show it to us, we're like, oh, it's great, cool name. Arc Board will never approve it.
Tim, I love the Onyx design. I love the name.
Me too.
Bridget, I told her she said it first. It wasn't going to fly. She was right, but I love that one.
It was like a dark brick, so it was real industrial looking, and like just it looked really cool and complemented the red, but I knew they wouldn't bless it. Actually, in my Google email, it's still called the Onyx. So I'm still putting all the West End and then now the Kent Apartment stuff in my Onyx folder.
Yeah, we're thinking of naming it. We've got like 25 different names, but one that keeps on coming back is Franklin Lofts or Franklin Point.
That's not bad.
Yeah. So
there's the one, just so you know, there is a redo. It's basically voucher assisted housing out on Silver Meadows. They rebranded it as Franklin Crossings.
okay.
Not that it'll be confused, but it is a small community, and I can see people saying, oh, is that the place that's over where we used to be Silver Meadows? So that's just an anecdotal. I have a feeling you'll hear that. So
Yeah. Well, it's Kent West till we find a name.
You could do something like Franklin on the River or something like that, that kind of points that it's actually Franklin somewhere in the downtown versus confusing it with the one that's out on Silver Meadows.
Yeah, we got a lot of river names too, so,
Yeah, I think that might be a good one to include.
yeah.
Amanda, I did email you some stuff for rental licensing. You may not have seen it yet. I just did it about 10 minutes ago.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Michael Bruder did accept, so he's the only member. Oh, he's there. There he is. Oh, you came in on Iris's computer. Now I see you. Oh, you're trying to be stealth there.
Changing it right now. I missed that. There you go.
I thought you were a member of the public, so I was like, oh, okay. Hey, congratulations, Michael, joining Metis. That's fantastic news. I was very excited to see that for you.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah. Yeah.
Plus, you get to work with Elizabeth. She's one of our favorites.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm also really happy to still be downtown, to be right downtown Kent. It's really nice.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right, I think we have all the members here, and we don't have Adam. Is he logging in, Tim?
Actually, Adam had a death in the family, so Steve Jennings is going to
Okay.
be joining us.
Okay, he's not joined yet.
Yeah.
Here he comes right now. I'll let him. Okay, I think we got a full house now once he logs in. Hey, Eric, with all that snafu last night, I forgot to turn on the YouTube.
Yeah, so one of my internet stalkers pointed that out as she was watching last month's meeting before she realized it was the wrong one.
So somebody actually logs in to watch that. That's interesting. Well, they can watch tonight, so it is on. But all that stuff in the beginning when we were trying to get everybody to connect, I was like trying to get you the right phone number and everything. So that was all my fault. I missed that login.
I blame Dave.
Yeah, well, technically it was because Dave Mail had issues. That is correct, but
I am not blaming Dave Ruller for all who are interested in listening.
it's a BZA volunteer member. He's a little older and sometimes technology gets a little overwhelming, although Zoom is overwhelming regardless. So anyway.
All right, well, we will call to order the Kent City Planning Commission business meeting for January 26th, 2021 at 7:02 p.m. Mr. Fink, would you administer the oath to new commission members, please?
Mr. Bellis, that would be you. If you would raise your right hand. Do you swear to fairly, impartially, and honestly discharge your duties as a member of the Planning Commission and to uphold the laws of the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Ohio, and the Charter and ordinances of the City of Kent to the best of your ability, so help you God?
I do.
Please sign the form in front of you. Hold it up to the screen, and I will then notarize it once we get it back. Yep, that one.
Amanda has a form to sign too.
Yeah, do you want me to do mine now or separate?
You can do yours now as well. Presuming you also said I do.
I do.
Perfect, thank you. I will notarize both of those. Due to a change in the law, I can now notarize by watching people do it on video, so that does allow me, notaries are temporarily allowed to do that.
Drop the original off at community development.
Community development or the fire department, whichever is easier for you.
All
Or
right.
my house, since you live so close, but.
Okay. All right, moving on to roll call, please.
Ms. Edwards,
Present.
Mr. Clevenger Morris,
Present.
Mr. Bruder,
Present.
Mr. Clapper,
Present.
Mr. Bellis,
Present.
everybody's here.
Planning Commission operates in accordance with the provisions of the Kent City Charter, the Kent Zoning Code and Subdivision Regulations, all of which establish the powers and duties of the commission. Members of the Planning Commission are appointed by Kent City Council and serve without compensation. Certain cases such as conditional zoning certificates, special zoning permits, overlay district projects, and zoning amendment require public hearings before the Planning Commission. During the public hearing, any persons wishing to address their concerns to the commission will be provided the opportunity. Once the public hearing is closed, it shall be to the discretion of the chair whether to allow any additional public comment. Cases such as site plan reviews and subdivision projects do not require a public hearing. However, the chair will allow public comment on each case as it is taken on the agenda. In each instance where the commission receives public comment or conducts a public hearing, those persons wishing to address their concerns to the commission will be required to do so under oath or positive affirmation. The oath or affirmation shall be administered to all who wish to speak at the beginning of the Planning Commission meeting. Once a decision has been made by the Planning Commission on a case, the case is closed for the commission as there is no provisions to reopen a case. With the exception of cases falling under subdivision code, any decision of the Planning Commission may be appealed to the city's Board of Zoning Appeals in accordance with Chapter 1109 of the Zoning Code. Anyone interested in appealing a decision of the Planning Commission is advised to seek private legal counsel. Mr. Fink, would you like to administer the oath?
Anyone who's going to be testifying in front of the Planning Commission, if you please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give before the Planning Commission shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If so, please say I do. Thank you.
Moving on to correspondence, we had 2 additional pieces of correspondence forwarded. We had a January 20th email from staff just letting us know that the staff report needed a correction regarding PC 21-001. And that was just that the Architectural Review Board made a recommendation, not a condition, which is what was stated in the staff report. And the second piece of correspondence was also January 20th. It was from Mr. Salehi in full support of the Kent West Apartments project, which is the PC 21-001. Have all commissioners had adequate time to review those additional correspondence pieces?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. First tonight is old business. It is PC 18-002. That's the Hasawi 211 Franklin Avenue, and it is a park fee review. Staff, would you like to introduce?
Yes, thank you. So back in February of 2018, Hasawi's 6-story building at 211 Franklin Street came before the commission and received approval. One of the conditions of approval was to come back with an agreed upon park fee so that the Planning Commission can approve the amount. So we are back with that amount of $12,480 for the park fee.
Thank you. And the applicant is not here this evening. I'm assuming he does not need to speak to us or present, and this is
Correct.
just formal. Okay. Are there any commissioner members who have questions or comments for the staff? And any public comment? Hearing and seeing none. Is there a motion?
I move that in case PC 18-002, the Planning Commission approve the park fee in the amount of $12,480 for a mixed-use facility, including commercial and residential uses at 211 Franklin Avenue, subject to obtaining park board approval of the amount.
Is there a second? Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing and seeing none, motion carries 5-0. And then moving on to new business. PC 21-001. This is Kent West Apartment, which is at 227 Franklin Avenue. They are here for a site plan review to construct a multifamily residential project. It is CD Commercial Downtown Zoning District. Would staff like to present, please?
Yes, thank you. So the applicant is proposing a 6-story, 47-unit apartment building at 227 Franklin Avenue. This actually came before you before under a different developer. So they are back with a new developer and a slightly changed site plan. So it is a permitted use in the CD district. So there are no additional conditions that go with it. The parking is, they are required to have a parking plan, and they have provided that. They have a existing parking lot adjacent to the south. And then they will use the parking deck at this time. Utilities are available in the area. The stormwater itself, there's essentially no increase of impervious areas, so there's no requirements for the stormwater. They are not proposing any signage at this time. They will come back when they are ready for the signs. The dumpster is located off of Alley 10. Landscaping, they have a little courtyard off to the north of the building. The site is pretty tight, so they don't have a whole lot of room to put landscaping, but that's where they will have some. The Architectural Review Board did review this in November and recommended that the brick be a more reddish hue, similar to the other structures in downtown, but they did issue a certificate of appropriateness. The applicant had gone to the Board of Zoning Appeals and got a variance for the height. And
Excuse me, Jen, that variance was denied though, so they adjusted it for the height.
no, thank you. I was trying to turn my page.
That's okay.
This project, because it's residential, will also need a park fee. We did not come to an agreement for a park fee before this meeting, so they will have to come back just like Hasawi's did. So I have a recommended motion should you wish to approve this. And there were 6 conditions that I recommended or staff recommended be associated with this project.
Great, thank you. And is the applicant here to present this evening? If you could state your name and address for the records, please.
Steve Jennings with LDA Architects, 5000 Euclid Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio.
Thank you.
And my name is Tim Dean. I represent Collegetown, Kent, the owner of the building.
I'm sorry, you were cutting out. Can you please repeat that, Mr. D? Was it Mr. Dean?
Yes, my name is Tim Dean, and I'm with Collegetown, Kent LLC. I reside at 22100 Horseshoe Lane, Strongsville, Ohio.
Thank you. And Mr. Jennings, did you want to proceed with your project?
Yeah, so would you like me to share the submission that we had provided for the Planning Commission?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
This is just the existing site plan, demolition, civil plan. There's several site plans we can go through and come back to any if you prefer. This one probably shows a little more clearly the building location in the middle with the parking lot to the south of Alley 8 as described. We also have the small courtyard to the north side, on which will abut the neighboring building that'll be on, it's under construction now. This is the grading plan. So we do have balconies on the north side overlooking that outdoor courtyard, as well as on the Franklin side, which faces the river. There are no balconies on either of the alley elevations. This is a close-up view of the courtyard. There is about a 6-foot difference in grade from Franklin to Alley 10 in the back. So there are a few steps in the courtyard, and then the transformer at the very rear of that. This is the typical floor plan, the main entrance off of Franklin. Again, access to the courtyard on the side, central corridor, stair at the end of that, and then elevator and stair off the lobby as well. I think the trash is actually off of Alley 8. I think was mentioned off of Alley 10 before. But it'll be completely enclosed in the building, and there'll be a garage door to access it when it's the truck comes for removal. The north elevation. South is the garage door I mentioned. This is the Franklin elevation. The rear Alley 10 elevation. And the perspective rendering. I also have, if you would prefer, I have the Architectural Review Board presentation that has more renderings, if you'd like to see those as well.
That would be great, please. Thank you.
This had a little bit more site information. Some existing photos. Here it is next to the kind of open parking lot to the south. Some smaller buildings on Franklin. Some of the other buildings in downtown. And this is the kind of material key. So in response to the comment before about the brick, we do have the horizontal bands that are the smooth Baxter color, which do have a bit of a red hue to them. The other bricks are more of a gray tone. This is the view from the south, kind of overlooking the future parking lot. This view from Franklin, from the northeast corner. Again, also mentioning the signage is just a placeholder. We would come back once a name and signage was developed. So that's really all the renderings.
Great. Thank you very much. If we have any questions, we'll definitely ask you to answer them. Commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff before we move on to discussion that you need answers to?
I guess I have two questions for the applicant in particular is if, and maybe Jennifer, you can chime in too, if the sanitary sewer study says that additional measures fail, what is the threshold for that? If you could just kind of inform us. And then I guess my other question is there the potential for the developer that the project wouldn't go forward if that was the case?
So they've been asked to do a sanitary sewer study. The city knows that there's an issue with our main trunk line that goes to the plant along the river. So if the study just shows that there is a insubstantial increase in the trunk line, that is not going to be an issue. If it shows that there's a pipe that's undersized from this parcel to get to that trunk line, then the applicant will be asked to replace that line with a bigger pipe.
That runs on the railroad track side of the river in that section?
The trunk line?
The trunk line, yeah.
Yeah, the trunk line is on the other side of the river.
Oh, at that point, it's on, okay, it's across the river.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from commissioners?
Hi.
Yep, Mr. Ballas.
I drove by the other day and the area where they did all the excavating, is that the site of the proposed building? Or is it next to that?
I can answer that. It is actually south of that site where you're seeing the active excavation. So if you look at the rendering that's up in front of you, you're seeing excavation going in on the building to the north, the one that's grayish looking. That one is known as Hassaui's, the one that we just approved the park fee for. So that one was before the Planning Commission a couple years ago. And after several delays, it's finally underway. So there'll be 2 6-story buildings there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a question for staff, and it's just because I've not seen this before. And I know parking, you know, they just have to basically tell us what their plan is, and the parking lot's going to be a separate thing in the future. But it says in their application along Franklin Avenue, a total of 9 parking spaces will be allocated as tenant-only parking. How,
I can answer that.
yeah,
Okay, that is basically a misstatement based on information from me. So council has authorized on-street overnight parking, not designated to any one facility or location on North Water. Staff had already also identified another overnight on-street area, again, not specific to one property, but for anyone who wants to acquire them, for Franklin. That'll be basically just south of this, in the area where the farmer's market is, the angled spaces, basically just south of Erie there, or of College, I mean. So that is planned and anticipated, but that has not been authorized by council, because at the time we identified them, neither one of these projects was anything but a concept. So we did not want to go through and codify designating overnight spots. But now with both projects going forward, that is anticipated to go before council. But again, to clarify, those 10 spots, those permits will be sold by the Community Development Department. Overnight permits, first come, first serve.
okay. That answers that question.
Those permits will be sold to the tenants or to the property owner?
To anyone who wants to buy an overnight permit. They have to show documentation that they live downtown. So right now we have 10 designated on North Water. It's actually on the west side of North Water, just before Cochran. If you look, it's actually signed for that.
Yeah.
It allows for overnight parking. It's the only overnight parking on street actually in the downtown district. And you have to have a hang tag permit. They're $35 a month that you have to buy a minimum of 3 months at a time. Right now, even though 10 spots were authorized by council, we only have 5 designated through signage because I've only sold 2. So the request for North Water was potentially overstated with regards to the interest in it. But the 2 that have bought them have provided in their application and through their driver's license proof that they reside downtown. So in other words, you can't buy this because you work at Ray's and want to stay overnight, but you really live in Stowe. This would be, you'd have to show proof that you're a downtown resident, and then it's first come, first serve.
Okay.
It's modeled after other programs that we identified in other cities.
Okay. Are there any other questions for staff or the applicant before we move forward? Okay. Hearing none. I also do not see anyone from the public, but if there's anyone from the public that would like to comment this evening, hearing and seeing none, we'll move forward to Planning Commission discussion. Mr. Bruder, would you like to start?
I think it's a nice project, so I don't really have any negative comments. I appreciate, I know there's some technical challenges, but I'm confident that the city and the design engineers will get them worked out. So that's it for me.
Mr. Clapper?
Most of my questions were going to be about parking, so we covered that. As far as the recommendation from the Architecture Review Board about having a more reddish hue, similar to other structures, like what is our authority and language on dictating color down there?
Ms. Dussel?
I can let Eric speak to this, but it is actually not part of the site plan. It's a recommendation.
Okay.
Eric, you can take over here if you want and explain how, if they were to address that, that would need to be couched.
It'll be challenging, but as
That's why I gave it to you.
certainly the Architecture Review Board has every right to make a recommendation to modify the color and to give suggestions what they think that color should be.
Please
However,
you can understand too, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Eric, there was a certificate of appropriateness issued for the facade and the colors that are actually on the building as it is presented in the rendering before you. So this was a recommendation added on top of and during the motion for the certificate of appropriateness that was not a requirement of it, because this project had come back to the Architectural Review Board no less than, I believe, 4 times. And with each one, they were trying to make adjustments from matters that had already been settled in a prior Architectural Review Board meetings. So with this last one, when that was brought up, that was not a matter that had been presented to be dealt with at that last meeting. It was basically a point of order. That was not the remaining issue that the developer needed to address. So they had to frame it as a recommendation rather than including it in the certificate of appropriateness. And Eric, if I misspoke, please correct me.
And
Nothing.
can I ask real quick, Ms. Dussel, when it says in staff report, a conditional certificate of appropriateness, does that have a special meaning?
no, they're always conditional because it's, if you were to deny it, then their approval means nothing if Planning Commission were to deny it.
Okay.
So it's conditioned on Planning Commission approving it as well.
My feeling was that because they did already issue the certificate of appropriateness, I didn't think that we had the ability to dictate what color a building is going to be. I thought that was kind of out of our reach. So,
Well, Jeff, let me go back and address that real quick. If you were to find that the colors would be particularly injurious to the neighborhood, the surrounding community, that would give you some basis. And by authorizing or recommending a reddish hue, that would allow the architects to come back with something different than what was formally approved, as long as it's consistent with that recommendation. If the architect came back with something that was an entirely different color, say purple, then that would not get the certificate of appropriateness. But if they came back with the same color or something with a reddish hue, that would give you the authority to rely upon the certificate of appropriateness that was already issued. Does that make sense?
it does. That caught me off. I didn't know that what we could do to that matter, but that clears it up for me.
We did try to address some of those matters in the update to the zoning code with regards to the confines of some of what can and cannot be included in a certificate of appropriateness. But until those design guidelines are actually addressed in totality, it is a bit of a challenge.
Okay. And that, I think, I was curious about what Michael asked about the sanitary sewer system, so that cleared that up for me. So I think I am good as of now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Clevenger Morris?
Yeah, so I think the project overall is fantastic. I had 3 concerns, all of which have been touched on by all of you so far: the sewer, the parking, and the red color. My only thought on red color was adding a 7, like ensure with assistance from the city that all brick utilized in the site have a more reddish hue similar to other structures in the downtown area where possible. Something where it gives them the ability to do that should they so choose, but at the same time respecting that this color was previously approved. So if they want to work with the city to adopt the color a little bit, they can, but again, I don't know what decisions and purchases and certain things have been put in motion based off of what was issued by the Architectural Review Board and if it was good enough to begin with. they chose to stay with this, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to. That's pretty much it for me.
Thank you. And Mr. Bellis, any comments?
I really enjoyed seeing that courtyard. That looks like it might be the, very enjoyable for the tenants. And I think overall, it looks very, very nice, and I hope the program, the plan can come together.
Thank you. I also do not have any concerns, just reviewing the criteria for a site plan in the commercial downtown district. I see all the criteria is met. And so I also have, my concerns have been addressed, and I would be okay moving forward with this project. Do we have a motion on the table?
I move that in case PC 21-001, the planning commission approve the site plan to construct a multifamily structure at 227 Franklin Avenue, subject to the following conditions. 1, submit for technical plan review. 2, perform a sanitary sewer study to verify there is adequate capacity and the system of capacity is inadequate. Measures must be taken to modify the city's sanitary system to provide the necessary capacity. 3, obtain a license to occupy the right of way from the city council. 4, building footers should the final design depict the footers being placed in the city's right of way. 4, collaborate with the city to design an efficient parking lot layout. 5, formalize a document such as a license to occupy, lease agreement, etc., to utilize city land if the final design depicts parking beyond the privately leased lot. 6, finalize the park fee amount. Obtain the park board approval for the park fee amount and returns to planning commission for approval of said park fee amount. And 7, ensure with assistance from the city that all bricks utilized on the site have a more reddish hue similar to other structures in the downtown area where possible and if necessary.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
I am not in favor of adding the color criteria to this. And I would also just to point out that when we say in the downtown district, the historic post office building, which is right across the alley from this, is not reddish. It's more in line with this. So I would personally consider that as a requirement, an undue burden on the owner, particularly when it's already been approved by the review board.
So from Michael, then would you like to have a motion that didn't have that condition in there? Because if that's your case, everything else suits you, just that. I tend to agree with you. I watched the meetings from the Architecture Review Board that they had. I understand your concern. I think that the developer and the Architecture Review Board understand each other and what they're trying to do. So I don't think it's overly burdensome on them, but I do see where you're coming from on this.
Well, I would also point out that my intention was to phrase it in such a way that should the developer decide to make that change, they are enabled and empowered to do that, but this does not require them to do so.
So when I heard Mr. Clevenger Morris's number 7, it kind of, to me, left it where we're able and if possible, that if the developer doesn't want to, it's not going to be able or possible. So
if it's necessary, they're empowered at this point to make that change, but we're not requiring them to do so. And that way, the only change that they can make moving forward outside what was previously approved by the Architectural Review Board would be going with a more reddish tone to match the majority of the downtown area.
Is that solid enough to stand on, Eric?
With that further explanation from Mr. Clevenger Morris, I believe that would be sufficient, and I believe I can defend that in court. If it either remains the same or adopts a reddish hue, yes.
Eric, can I ask a legal question? Versus adding it as a condition of approval, is there another terminology that we can use to make it part of the motion where it's not actually considered a condition of approval? The same way that the Architectural Review Board includes a recommendation in conjunction with issuing a certificate of appropriateness?
At the very end of Chris's motion, he's made the statement, if necessary.
Okay.
Based on what he said, I would be more comfortable if he had finished it with if desired.
I am fine with accepting that friendly amendment to if desired.
Can Eric make a friendly amendment?
If my seconder accepts it, I should be able to.
I can't make the motion because I'm not on the board. or
No, but
commission.
I'm saying I would add a friendly amendment to Eric's recommendation, and I would just need the person who seconded my motion to accept the friendly amendment to allow. it
Is
to
there a
stand.
second to the friendly amendment to change the word to desired?
I second it.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Friendly motion is accepted 5-0. Now that our original motion has been moved and seconded with the friendly amendment, any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you, everyone.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Have a
Yeah.
good evening.
You too.
Good night.
Moving on to PC 21-003. That's the Kent Codified Ordinance, Chapter 11, which is the Planning and Zoning Code chapters 1107 to 1175. Staff is looking for Planning Commission to review, and it's a partial recommendation to council. Would staff like to present?
Yes, thank you. So we have been reviewing the zoning code for the last couple years. We are now at the point where we think they have all the changes in there for the first half of the zoning code, which is what we are bringing forward to you tonight. You need to have a public hearing, so that's the purpose of having it on your agenda tonight, to hold the public hearing and discuss the zoning code if there's other changes for the first part, which is chapters 1101 through 1106. When it goes to council, we would like it all adopted at one time. So we are only asking you to forward this to council for them to have a public hearing on the first half. And then after you have reviewed the second half, you would do the same thing with the second half, and then they would adopt it in its entirety. So that's why the motion is kind of funky, but that's why we're here tonight. Have a public hearing, having any other discussion and changes, and forward it to council.
Are there any specific pages that commissioners have questions about?
I do. I'm just looking through my notes because I thought I made a note on one more page early on that I'm not seeing. So if anybody has anything, go right ahead.
I was really excited that on 37 Tree Lawn, there's a now piece next to it that says also known as quote devil strip. That just made my day.
We did that in your honor, Chris.
I appreciate it.
Did everybody see it in the Akron Beacon Journal this
I
weekend?
saw your email, Jeff. Yeah, I was going to use that if it didn't show up in the packet. I was going to say, well, now we have to do it because it's a major publication.
So this document is still going to be having like format type things and things like that.
Yeah, there's some formatting issues and some minor, for like the lack of a better word, what we would call Scrivener's errors. They're things that don't change the intent or content of the wording itself, but they clean it up. Like we found some stuff too where certain things end with a period and where others have a colon. So we need to go through that and do that final polish. The consultant, actually, I just talked to him today. But with regards to the wording and the intent, this is accurate.
Okay. Yeah, I was thrown off at first when I was like section 111. I don't see that, but
yeah.
So
you will on the 9th.
Okay.
Well, the section 111 is actually the current zoning code, which allows you to amend it. So some of the numbers like 1175, that's the current zoning code. It gets very confusing.
Yeah. Okay.
11,
I thought he was talking about
is where you
1111.
want to change it now.
I assume when it comes to the bounding boxes around some of these diagrams and different charts that they're going to line up, like on 55, for example, like you have the header row under E that is all the way the length of the page, or the width of the page rather, and then the bounding box underneath it for the actual columns doesn't match the full right width, if that makes sense. So if you're on page 55 and you're looking at the E section, that green box goes all the way to the right, but then the white boxes underneath it don't. It's a small formatting issue, but
Oh, I see. You're talking at the bottom of 54.
is it 54?
54, that should be at the top of the boxes on 55. Is that what you mean?
I'm talking about at the bottom of 55. If you look at E dimensional regulations, that green bar for E dimensional regulations goes all the way to the right. And then lot and building height standards and everything underneath it does not match the same width.
I do
Print
not.
your own copy from an electronic version, Chris?
56
I do not have that on
I'm
my.
looking at the electronic copy that you sent in the email.
56 on the printed copy.
56 on the printed, sorry.
Okay, it's, all right, it's a very minor.
But
right?
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's
Yeah,
minor, but I
yeah,
assume we're gonna go through and make sure everything lines up before
Yeah,
we.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Right.
part of the polishing. We will be getting to that too.
And on pages 43 through 45, the top header section that breaks out the different zoning districts, if there are, for printed copies, I'd like to see that on every page. Because when I was going through it and flipping through and trying to figure out what line goes to what, I just labeled them in there myself.
Actually, it's supposed to be. I'm not sure why he doesn't have that. It was in the prior version. Because we had actually asked him to do that. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. Good catch there, Jeff.
No, we actually had that in the other version, so I will find out why he took that off. We did have him move some of these things in this chart. He originally had this chart done based on, it was organized by, we're not exactly sure the organization. It was based on uses, I think, from the way our original districts were, but it was very difficult to find things. So we made him just recently alphabetize this entire table. And I think when he was focusing on the alphabetizing, he did not carry over the headers. So I will make sure that that happens, because I know we had the same thing, because it's a pain. Otherwise you don't know where you're at.
So while we're there, sorry, I've got like notes over, on page 44, mixed use developments, that line is completely blank.
Yeah, because we had to identify, we actually just added that use, and I have that. For the mixed use, he did not have it when we printed this version out. Staff has, and you'll see the actual conditions when we look at the second half chapter. It's in our new 1106. Or no, it should be in here. Actually, we need to add it in here. So for the conditionally permitted for mixed use, it's going to be in the commercial. So if you want to handwrite it in, you can, but it will be in the final version that you see. It's going to be in the CD, CR, NC, C, U, and the ICR. So it'll be conditional in all those, because it is a mixed use. It needs to be conditional. We're not letting any permitted use that's a mixed use, because we wouldn't know what those mixes are ahead of time. So when you get into 1106, we actually, I think, have identified concerns, which if we actually flip to that, I'm not sure if he had the.
Before you leave this page real quick, I also want to point out that we've asked them to create additional spacing because at the headers, the letters line up so close
Especially on the I, it's on
the
top.
I.
of-
So
Yeah.
that's one of the things we asked them to do for visual purposes. Then go back to what Bridget was saying.
But so for example, so for the mixed use, we're making it conditional basically in those basically 5 commercial, and we felt that the U district seemed to make sense with discussions about like an intergenerational, and there's been some talk about doing student mixed with intergenerational. So we are allowing it as a mixed use as conditional in the U as well. So if you go to, in the printed version, 105, for the mixed use developments, we have identified, we went through and redid this entire section, and some of you maybe were not here for that, but what we did was we identified what are potential concerns, matters that need to be discussed, so that if they seem problematic based on that mixed use or the combination of those mixed uses, those are areas where conditions can be developed and added based on the nature of the project. And then there's actually one specific condition to the mixed use, which is the planning commission determining if the proposed mix of multiple primary uses are complementary and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So those categories, by the way, are on this list, which has not gone to the consultant because they're like polishing final things. And that was one of those items that where we were going to put in the chart. And I'm going to add right now, continue headers, as they were on the prior version.
I would offer one other thing too, just based on Chris's comment too about the having PDF page numbers and printed page numbers be the same, because I've just seen that cause too many problems, right? You know, so, and there are ways to do that.
Right now, we're not creating a PDF version of this other than to share the drafts, but once we get everything finalized, and one other thing too we want to do, we do not like that it's just a flat page number. So I talked to the consultant today. So for example, when we're in 1103, like we just were, it's going to be 1103-44. So when you look down at the bottom of the page, you know exactly what chapter you're in and what page it is in that chapter. Of course, it'll be numeric throughout the entire document, but we have found that to be useful in our existing zoning code. It's just helpful. You know what chapter you're in, and so add it to the footer. So we're going to adjust that as well.
That's even better. Thank you.
I have the rest of mine if you want me to knock them out real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
For microbreweries, and I don't remember when we had the discussion on this and all the
Which
details.
page are you on? Are you in the chart on microbreweries?
We can do it right from the chart on page 44.
Okay.
So we have microbreweries permitted in the IR, and that's just that small parcel up by Davy Tree, correct?
For now.
Okay. But we don't have them in the CD district, and I think they should be either conditionally permitted in the CD district. And is there a reason they would be permitted and not conditionally permitted in the IR?
Eric, we've talked this through because you crafted it. This is beer production is the primary focus of a microbrewery. They do not serve food. They are producing beer. So it is an industrial use. So that is why it is basically permitted in the I.
Well, you have it permitted in the IR, but conditional in the I. So I didn't know if those are both.
It should be permitted in the I. Wasn't it permitted, you guys? Eric, Jen?
I'm looking at the chart right now, and he's right. Those two letters are reversed.
Well, you know what? Probably when he alphabetized it, when he copied some things over.
Well, even in like on page 75 in the IR, it lists microbrews as permitted principal use. Let me find my I section. And it has them as conditional on page 76.
I'm looking at the old table. Hang on. Before we had him alphabetize it.
Jeff is definitely reading it properly. That is what it says right now, which is why we have lots of eyes looking at these things. So, Jeff, I'm glad you caught that. But that definitely does not match the notes that I have from our review.
So they're going to be a final look through by staff where they go piece by piece and make sure that it matches up in each section.
Definitely. We've actually been doing it, but then we got to go through it one more time again before it goes to council in March.
Literally today, we finished the second read through.
The consultant just sent us back a revised version this afternoon. So there's another version out there that we need to look at.
Let's see. While we're still in breweries, should we not have them conditionally permitted in the NC as well? Because didn't we just approve one there?
No, that's actually a restaurant that is producing beer.
Okay.
The problem is everyone assumes if they're doing beer production on site, it's a microbrewery.
Okay.
That is actually, the Bell Tower is a restaurant, but that is the primary use. The microbrewery, the beer production on site is ancillary to the primary restaurant use. So it's not a microbrewery. Yes, they're going to call themselves that, but it doesn't meet the definition of a microbrewery as we have, which is the beer production is the primary use.
Okay. So back to that point then, do we want to allow them, because it is potential they could pop up in the downtown area. So do we want to have them conditionally permitted in the CD?
We don't have any kind of manufacturing or production in a commercial. If that's the sole focus, think of Madcap. They solely produce beer.
Right,
Northwater Brewing solely produces beer. They're both located in the I.
right.
They are
But I'm
not allowed to have restaurants as part of it.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm also thinking of a place like Great Lakes Brewery that is a brewery, but does tremendous retail, restaurant, and like bottling and everything there. So, to be able to get something like that downtown potentially, we just don't want to allow any production downtown as the primary focus?
Just to respond to you, because our downtown area is so much limited in space, I'm not sure that we'd want to do that, but it's certainly something that's up for discussion.
Right. Well, I figured if we had it conditional down there, it would at least, it's not permitted, it's conditional. So
At this point, we have a pretty clear and distinct differentiation between a microbrewery and a restaurant that offers beer they produce on site. And right now, I think it's better to stick with that model. If someone were to come to us with, actually, we do have North Water Street Brewing is considering expanding or requesting a geographic amendment to the zoning map to extend the CD north to include their parcel because they want to include a restaurant component. Because right now they're in the industrial and they cannot. There's a reason we don't have restaurants in the industrial.
Yeah. Okay. So if they do that, if they become part of the CD, does their restaurant have to be their primary focus?
It has to be equivalent to, yes, or greater than the microbrewery.
Okay. Well, how is that measured? Is it measured by sales?
It would be, is there a full kitchen? Is there service? Those are pieces that we would look at that time.
Okay.
Bell Tower, if you look at the square footage, it's a restaurant. And a kitchen is the primary. And they do have to have a certain amount of production of beer produced on site to meet certain permit requirements from the state of Ohio as well. So that would play into it as well.
I mean, just looking at the size of the brewing facility in North Water, I don't know how big of a kitchen they're planning on putting in, but I don't think it's going to be any bigger than their brewing square footage.
I would rather not modify a code now on what ifs and what could be and make changes to it once we actually see where demand goes. Because at this point, the two microbreweries that we have their use has actually fallen in with the definition of production that serves those industrial districts.
Right. I just
Bell
don't.
Tower is a restaurant.
Yeah, I did, and I'm sure you're right about this. I just don't know if not allowing it conditionally downtown might scare off potential people that want to do something downtown because they think, oh, I have to make it a focus of a restaurant. So I don't know what the incredible harm would be in allowing microbreweries conditionally downtown.
Eric, I'm letting you take this one.
Yeah, and I don't want to be argumentative about it. I just want to understand fully.
Well, I said, it's not what we're in favor of right now as staff, but again, we don't get to make these decisions. These are decisions driven by the Planning Commission and the City Council itself.
And they also could be something that with this new definition of a mixed use that has two primary uses.
Okay.
It could be something that if that were to come where, let's say, the Star of the West Mill, which is not going to be a microbrewery. So I want to be on the record as saying that is not it. I'm just pulling that out as a vacant building that can be used. If someone were to come and say that they were going to do a microbrewery and restaurant, residential, three different uses, at that point, we would be looking at that as a conditional use and seeing if it is complementary to the other uses in the building. So by adding a mixed use, we actually may have allow that type of project to go forward. We have not applied it yet though, so we're not sure.
Okay, well, that works for me then. Does anybody else have any opinion on my assessment?
Eric, Jen, do you agree with that potential use of mixed use, or is that something?
I agree with the potential use as a mixed use. I also want to say that one of the things that we listed under microbreweries as a concern would be the product logistics, where Obviously, we already have lots of trucks making deliveries downtown,
Correct.
but we're not trying to, I said, we've received lots of complaints over the years about the mill blocking up Main Street or Water Street. Obviously, people not realizing that the mill was here first.
Yeah.
But we're not trying to increase truck traffic downtown if we can help it. But you're right. We're trying to make sure that we create opportunities for downtown to grow as well. So, I mean, you raised some good points.
Well, any business, it doesn't matter what it is, it goes downtown, is going to have to get product in and out if it's any kind of retail food or beverage place. So that would seem
If it
like,
was doing massive bottling, like your Great Lakes example, that would definitely be something that would not be served well by a commercial downtown without a loading dock and.
correct.
that kind of
I
thing.
totally agree with that.
So right now, the microbrewery is truly a microbrewery. As we envision, the primary product is the production and distribution of beer produced on site.
Okay.
Well, alcoholic beverages, because we also have, as Jen pointed out, you've got the meaderies. People are doing bourbon. So we made it alcoholic beverages is produced and distributed on site. That's the primary use. So that does allow for more than just beer.
Okay. Anybody else have any opinion on it? Or am I just crazy about it?
I don't see the need for having breweries in downtown, to be honest. I think with the price of rent, it would be more feasible to have a restaurant where they produce and serve, but then they can serve other alcoholic beverages that they don't make and food and whatnot. I don't see a brewery only going in downtown anytime soon.
Okay. So we'll just change the I designation to P and keep it as P in the IR.
It should be P in the I,
And C in the IR.
right? It should be flip-flopped.
And then we'll have to make sure that our tables match accordingly. And I'm sure that when he flipped it one place, he then, in double checking himself, flipped it the other spot also.
Yeah.
Right.
Jeff, I think you bring up some good points, Jeff, and I think that the challenge really is sort of a question of scale.
Yeah.
Right. Great Lakes is a massive operation. It would be pretty disruptive. But one truck a day would be manageable. But and that's, I think, some of the scale that you're talking about, and it's really hard to codify that. So I think the mixed use really gives you a nice kind of umbrella to put all this under, to at least have an avenue to talk about it later, so that community development doesn't tell somebody no right off the bat.
Right.
But they say you got to sort of fit within this framework. So there's
Right.
still possibilities.
And
all
that's
these
why the
places start
condition
somewhere.
for mixed use is complementary, and that's decided by the planning commission. So,
Okay, that works for me then.
Right, so how soon are we going to see this geographic request come forward from North Water?
well, we sent it to the architect, I think it was maybe, how long ago, Jen? 2 weeks ago? When they asked for that? When Rick Hoxley asked for that?
We have the application in now.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Eric, I missed what you said.
It was me. I asked, how soon are we going to see the North Water Street geographic change request? Because I just in the back of my head immediately went like, oh my gosh, people are going to say spot zoning.
Well, no,
It goes across though, because we're continuing the CD down North Water.
Hopefully it's pretty smooth. But I'm just
well, the night after we had the meeting where we passed along the recommendation for the lot next to the post office, I ran into the owners of North Water Brewery when it was just a concept and that topic came up, and they just never followed through with it.
Oh.
They are in way over their heads down there.
well, as long as you're over your head in beer, that's there are worse things that could happen.
I think they're over their head in worse things than beer.
And just because the geographic amendment may or may not be authorized by planning commission in the coming weeks or months does not mean the restaurant will follow in, short order. The Field of Dreams, if we build it, they will come, not necessarily. If we change the zoning, they will come, not always. So.
Right. And council also, it's really just a recommendation from us, right?
Correct.
Council has to accept it. So
Correct.
they got a couple of high hurdles to cross
Right.
first. Okay.
I have a question for Eric on page like 28 and 29 for all of the marijuana sections. Some of them say in accordance to Ohio Administrative Code, section 3796, and some of them don't. Is that something that should be consistent on all of those? Like marijuana processor 151, should that have that little disclaimer there? In like the laboratories?
The actual, there's 4 categories that are actually under the Ohio Revised Code. So I'll have to look at that. So there's actually 4 uses that talk about it. But we, like the district, Eric, why do we have that in there? District.
Why does it also say Ohio Revised Code and Ohio Administrative Code referencing the same section? It's 3796 in both pieces, but in one you say revised code and one you say administrative code. Is there a difference there legally that I'm not seeing?
There is, but we're gonna double check to make sure that they
Yeah,
both are 3796.
because it can be the same or it could be different. But what I need to see is, because I do not think anywhere, Eric, these were added from our prior definition, but I do not think that all of these are even used in any of the districts. Because we only have those 4 that are conditionally permitted uses that we talk about in 1106. The processor, the testing laboratory, and the cultivator, which is the 145. So there's cultivator, dispensary, processor, and testing lab. So the other ones may have been ones that were actually included in the OAC or the ORC, but we don't necessarily need them here. I'll have to look at that.
We'll look at that again and make sure we have what we need and try to make sure we don't have anything beyond what we need.
Okay.
Exactly.
While we're talking about medical marijuana, can we conditionally allow it downtown? Where it would be profitable in the city?
At this point, the districts that it's in, when we took care of this in 2018, it reflects under what current state law would support.
State law wouldn't allow it to be downtown in any location?
If there's changes to the medical marijuana rules or regulations, which is anticipated to occur in the next 2 to 3 years, at that point, we would change it based on that. But when these were put through in 2018, it was based on the law as it is in place still currently.
I forget what exactly prohibited us from allowing it down there compared to the other 4 that we did allow it.
It's all
Right.
by appointment only. It's by appointment only. There's certain criteria with regards to square footage, security. There were various, very specific controls that had to be met in that medical marijuana section. So it's not just like a storefront.
Okay.
At this point, it's not.
So if it does become that way, we can just revisit it then.
We would make an amendment to the zoning code based on what the new laws bring about, correct?
Okay.
Um,
All
I'm sorry, Jeff, were you?
I think that's all I have.
And I wanted to just confirm on page 80 of the printed version. I know that there was some talk in the past about this map, and I honestly don't even know which is the correct version, but I just wanted to make sure that that's the correct version.
It is. If you'll see the part that included the hotel or the proposed site next to the post office for the hotel is no longer there. This is the original map as it was adopted back in 2011.
Okay. Sorry, I should have made a list of the pages I had notes on.
Can you remind us again what the process was going to be and the timing for reevaluating the boundaries of that map?
When we revise or go through the process of amending the design guidelines, the Appendix A, which was not part of the zoning code update. Currently, this was basically done using those design guidelines as the factor that would determine the certificate of appropriateness within the district. So at this point, since those have not changed, increasing or decreasing it seemed like moving deck chairs. We hadn't really dealt with the substantive issues with regards to the design guidelines themselves. The design guidelines, I'm digressing here for a minute, as a reminder, were actually put together by Main Street Kent in anticipation of the creation and establishment of a historic district. The historic district never came to fruition because the designated areas were, many of the property owners were not comfortable with such a designation. So this West River Overlay District was established, and as part of it and not part of it, I should say. But we're using design guidelines that were designed for a historic district in an area that is not a historic district. That's problematic. We find.
Right.
Staff
Well,
find.
and I'm just more sort of anticipating that it might come up in the public comment meetings or at zoning, but you have a clear explanation, so I feel like we're ready
Right.
for that.
We agree. Actually, I've had those discussions informally with members of council. So what we would like to do with the design guidelines, which will actually be a much more expeditious process than this zoning code update. COVID didn't help. This took 2 years. It should have been done sooner, but we had about a 5 or 6 month delay. But with the design guidelines, we want to hire a consultant for design guidelines, not historic guidelines, but design guidelines, and work with them and the planning commission to create design guidelines that are more reflective of what we would consider an eclectic mix in our downtown. It's a mix of historic, new, old. So something that also could maybe address some of the public art piece. So we're looking forward to getting those design guidelines updated. There is a cost factor. So it'll likely, once we see how our budget fleshes out in 2021, we're kind of operating at 20% O&M less than what we had the prior year. We're kind of working with a little tighter budget. So money for a consultant is not in my budget this year, but it is hopeful that we can tackle that in 2022.
All right, thank you.
Unless somebody wants to give me 50,000, we could take care of that now.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, exactly. We'll let council give it to us. Exactly.
We'll ask Peter what he's doing.
Yeah.
All right, I have one more, and I know this is beating a dead horse, but it's so confusing to me, so I can only imagine to other people. Page 18, going into how many people can live where, is very confusing to me.
I thought we had talked about, Amanda, getting a chart for that when we did that section, didn't we? Like having a small breakout so that people could.
We have a chart for that in here somewhere, don't we?
We have a chart of like what's considered a related person.
Right, but not, like, there has to be a way to make this easier to.
I guess like one of the things I'm confused about would be like single family dwelling, a building consisting of a single dwelling unit. And then you look at single dwelling unit, and the last sentence says, or 3 or more unrelated adults. It's just so confusing to me.
What page are you on?
18 of the printed version. I guess I thought we weren't supposed to have more than 2 unrelated people. But in like dwelling, it says or 3 or more unrelated, and dwelling unit says 3 or more. So I'm just so, I don't know. I need help.
So you said under, you saw single dwelling unit somewhere?
Well, it just says under dwelling, single family, a building consisting of a single dwelling unit. So then you go to look at what a single dwelling unit is. And it's utilized by a family, a household unit, or 3 or more unrelated.
Well, the
Are we
dwelling
changing
unit is actually the unit. You're thinking of the occupants. So a dwelling unit can be a single family dwelling unit like your house. It can be, so if you look at the dwelling unit definition first, it's any room or group of rooms located within a dwelling and forming a residential household unit with facilities that are used or intended to be used for. So in other words, a dwelling unit can be in a dwelling unit can be any of those different categories.
Okay.
So like a dwelling unit can be an apartment. A dwelling unit could be classified as a rooming house. A dwelling unit could be classified as like a duplex would have 2 dwelling units. So it's the actual like enclosed space by which people occupy it. Then based on the zoning district and the classification that's been assigned to it, that determines the number of occupants that can be related or unrelated. So they're
So-
kind of 2 different things.
Right,
even
so
though I
like
know
with
it's
the
confusing.
dwelling unit definition, when it says at the very end, or 3 or more unrelated individuals, that's where it makes it, to me, confusing there.
Because a dwelling unit could be a rooming house.
Exactly.
And you could have 3 to 15 unrelated persons living in a rooming house under the definition of a rooming house.
It would still be it would still be a single dwelling unit. It would still be, the overall structure would still be a dwelling.
So like a fraternity house is a single dwelling unit, right? They have 1 kitchen and a living room and then oodles of bedrooms, right?
Mhm.
That is considered, think of it almost like that. That is basically a dwelling and 1 dwelling unit because they have 1 kitchen, hopefully more than 1 bathroom, but let's just say they share common spaces and live. And so the only individual space they have is their own bedroom, which is no different than your house where you have a dwelling unit, but you have a bedroom and your children have a bedroom, right?
Right.
So a fraternity house, same way, you guys share, they're sharing. So that's a dwelling unit. Now, what you're thinking about is based on the zoning district, how many can live in it. So for example, a single family dwelling is allowed in an R1, R2. Well, that's not a good one. Let's pick a rooming house. They can only be like in an R4 and up. Okay, so you're allowed to have more than 3 or more unrelated if the dwelling unit has gone through as a conditionally permitted use through the planning commission and designated as something that allows to have more than that. But you can't take a single, a house in a R1, R2, or R3, which is basically a single dwelling unit or 2, it could be a duplex. Well, in R3, and put more than 2 unrelated in there, because then in each of those dwelling units in an R1, you're only allowed 1 family. I know it sounds confusing, but there's a difference between occupancy and the unit.
So you got a family, let's say in an R1 or R2. You're saying we could regulate how many people can be there, how big the family can be?
Not the family, if they meet our definition of family, the number of unrelated persons. How many people could rent, how many people could rent or live there that are not considered a family? So in that scenario, Nick, you have to go to our definition of family, which is on page 19. It's kind of split. And so a family is individuals who are related by marriage, legally recognized civil union, adoption, who are within 3 degrees or fewer of consanguinity. And we have a figure on the next page that identifies those areas. So that's a family. So a family can live in a single family dwelling. A family can live in a 2-family dwelling. A family can live in a multi-family. But they still have to be a family. Even if they're 50 units, they have to be a family or no more than 2 unrelated. The new definition we have to allow unrelated in where there's 50 units would be an apartment. where we allow up to 4 unrelated who share a living room, share a kitchen, that kind of thing.
And these do not violate or go against the fair housing tenants or laws, not permissible?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have allowances for caregiver. We have allowances for facilities that would have persons with disabilities, for example, 3 unrelated persons that have disabilities that people would call, or used to be called, a supportive housing environment or group housing. That's defined different and separately and is allowed.
Well, I'll agree with Amanda. I gotta study this one a little bit more. It's,
And since you're new to this, if at some point you want to sit down and go over this with us in greater detail, one-on-one, I mean, we agree. We deal with this day in, day out, and we still go back and look at the charts periodically to make sure we don't get ourselves tongue-tied over it.
So regardless, R1, 2, and 3 is going to be no more than 2 unrelated. And then
Right.
what's
Unless there's a non-conforming use there prior.
R4, it's conditionally permitted.
Correct.
What the rooming and boarding house
Correct.
that they'd have to go apply for.
Yeah. Or now, and actually, I think we have apartment now, the new apartment in an R4 and in a U.
Okay.
That is correct.
So in other words, there's the number of dwelling units is limited maybe by a zoning district. But the bigger districts, you can have more dwelling units, but maybe the occupants are limited no more than 2 unrelated. So that would be the difference on some of those student-oriented houses, ones whether we limit them to a family or no more than 2 unrelated, or the new definition apartment, which would allow 4 unrelated to rent in a 1 dwelling unit.
Okay.
Clear as mud, I know.
Split hairs, but I don't know how often it comes up. Do you need to ask about foster children?
Foster children actually would meet our definition of family, so we would not have any issues with that at all. And that, as I said, we also have allowances for, we have one actually, and I think it's an R2 area where the father came to us, his adult son who's developmentally disabled, he wanted to move him into his own facility with basically a caregiver coming in, but not staying there, just coming in and assisting, and 2 more unrelated. Well, all 3 of them were identified and receiving financial assistance through the county DD board. So they met our definition for that type of a house. So there are 3 unrelateds in an R3, but it's under a different category than family or rooming house or any of those.
Or even for like, this is not a real situation, but let's say I have a first cousin that's 5 years old and I go to take care of them, then you'd be considered a caregiver because they're a minor.
Yeah. And honestly, we are not, that situation would not create, no one would probably notice that child was there.
But even if they did notice it, you'd be covered under the caregiver exemption, so we're not being sued anyways.
Correct. The reason this is the way it is because prior to our definition of family being tightened up and Eric coming up with his ingenious table of consanguinity, which removed any questions, is because prior to this, everybody was a cousin. So we would have 4 unrelated living in an R3, and neighbors are complaining because 4 unrelated college students live completely differently than a family where they're taking care of a 5-year-old cousin. So it's a very different dynamic. So an example is my first house in Kent was on West Grant. It's an R3. I ironically received a call and a complaint about college kids living in a house on that street, and I knew exactly which house it was, and I went up to the door and asked because it was we had one code enforcement off that time and they weren't available, and I asked the kid who answered the door how many were living there, and he said there's 4 graduate students here. There was like cars from the PA and stuff. So the neighbors in that cul-de-sac are all families, and you have 4 college kids in there with 4 significant others and a more active social life than the families living on that cul-de-sac. So it became very apparent that was not a family living there. So when I talked to the owner, who I knew, and I explained it to him, he did not realize he could not rent to more than 2 unrelated persons, or it had to be a family. Now, if he had rented to a family, nobody would have, you wouldn't have had 4 vehicles with 4 guests and 4, it's also another reason why Eric spent a lot of time working with me and others, and Heather and stuff, to figure out how do we define guest, because we hear that a lot. There was people, well, they're complaining and they would say, well, there's only 2 of us living here. Well, they had permanent girlfriends there or boyfriends there, creating basically 4 unrelated persons. So we had to define guest. So if you're there for over 14 days in a row, you are considered a resident, which means you have now 3 unrelated persons, and it is an illegal rooming house. So we had to take every scenario, and in a college town, you wouldn't believe how many angles there are. So there are a lot. This is probably 3 or 4 amendments just to get this group of definitions this way.
I know, and it's still confusing. And I know we've gone over it a million times. And I think I know, and the next time I read it, I'm confused again.
And the invitation's to you also, if you want to talk about it in more detail.
Just think dwelling unit is the actual unit itself. It's the physical structure and who's sharing the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, that kind of thing.
So explaining, like, in the definition, the word family, it's no more than 2 unrelated house. And then of course, rooming and boarding is that, and then the new apartment. So I think I've got it now.
Yeah. So the new apartment was created, it's a little bit after the horse is out of the barn, but it was done to accommodate the University Oaks, 345 flats, those ones that came in because they went in under a rooming house designation to allow for more than 2 unrelated per unit. Well, that's not logical. A rooming house is this ones that you think of in college towns that are single family, that have, 3 to 15 in there. It looks like a single family house, just a big one. And they all have their own bedrooms, but share everything else. So we made this definition, and quite honestly, that is the only new apartment, is the only new one in this realm. And we have not tried it yet. So we may find that that doesn't work if somebody wants to put one in an R4 or an R3, a U. So we will see. I think it's going to be okay though.
Any other commissioners have any notes that they want to review?
I think it's time to launch this thing.
So looking at Jen's wording for the motion, because that's very confusing, I'm going to let Jen reread that, or somebody look at that. So we're doing a 2-part. This is the first part, and then on the 9th, you'll have the remaining 1107 through 1114, and that's where that part 2 of 2 will be coupled with this part 1.
Are we expecting any business at the next meeting other than the zoning amendments as of now?
No, that's it.
And when is the date of the next meeting? We pushed it back 1 week.
February 9th.
The 9th.
So there is no meeting then February 2nd.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a motion on the table?
I move that in case PC 21-003, the Planning Commission recommend to Kent City Council to hold a public hearing and review the proposed zoning code text for proposed chapters 1101 through 1106, with the intent to adopt the amended zoning code in its entirety after the public hearing for part 2.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries 5-0.
Michael, I just want to restate, you're holding us our feet to the fire on some of the conditions and how we've done it now with concerns and conditions. I mean, hopefully you like that, but that was a lot inspired by what you talked about at the meeting, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So if you don't like it, then we'll
It's your
we're gonna
fault.
blame you.
Actually, looking at it with
It's
the.
okay, take it out of my salary.
Yeah. With the areas of concern, staff actually liked it too, because it kind of then makes everybody stop and think, is this a matter? And if it's not a matter, then you just move on. If it is, that then prompts you to work on developing a condition specific to that concern in that use. So gives you a little more latitude, but also flags things. And then of course, we still have some things that are actually hardcore conditions, so.
All right, seeing that there's no other business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Hearing none, motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
We will get this polished up and stuff yet. I can't wait to read it yet another time. So, well, the only good thing is I'm now learning the new chapters. Like I know the new chapter numbers. I'm like, where to go for what? Because that was a little stressful letting go of my dog-eared old book that I can't part with it. But now at least I'm learning.
Now, will council read all of this and ask you all of their questions? Or how does that work?
The way I'm planning to do it, I ran this past Jen, Heather, and Eric, and I think we're all in agreement. So one of the reasons I'm reading it again from start to finish is A, to make sure that all these little issues and polishes are caught yet again, or what we missed. But also I'm going to make, for lack of a better word, cliff notes for every chapter. What were significant differences that made to this chapter from the prior? They will get the version that is the whole copy, but I'm betting they'll look at my cliff notes of each chapter. And like, for example, the EMT, the electronic boards, those basically are prohibited now, except for just flashing or showing, not flashing, no flashing, I'm sorry, showing the price of gas. So that's something that in that chapter should be pointed out. The use of a listing of concerns and stuff. So I'm going to go through and identify those areas. The inclusion of microbreweries now as a use that includes anywhere where you're producing alcohol on site that wasn't there. So I'm just going to go through and pick the 5 or 6 key pieces from each chapter and give them that. They can ask about anything if they truly want to read the whole thing. So I do know some of them have asked about some of the dynamics of the board structure with regards to the ARC board. So I anticipate that section will get some review. So.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
You can go do it for me if you'd like.
I might come watch.
It'll be on YouTube. It will be.
Get yourself a bottle of wine.
I'll come be your backup.
From a microbrewery.
All right.
All right.
Get a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice
Good night,
day.
everyone.
Nice to meet you, Nick.
Same here.
Yeah, welcome, Nick. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.